At the end of June, the United States Supreme Court overruled the Roe v. Wade decision from 1973 that had legalised abortion across the United States. The majority of the court ruled that there was no right to abortion in the US Constitution and that therefore the judgment in the Roe v. Wade case was flawed from the very beginning. They decided that the issue of abortion should be returned to the people's elected representatives. This means it is now going to be up to individual states to determine their own laws on what protection should be given to unborn human life. To help us reflect on this particular monumental decision, we've assembled a very special panel of guests. We're joined today by Jeanne Mancini, who's the president of the March for Life in the United States, Professor Emeritus of Trinity College Dublin, William Binchy, and Eilís Mulroy of the Pro-Life Campaign. Many people thought the day would never arrive when Roe v. Wade would be overturned, but it has. We want to start by taking a moment to honour all of those who've been part of the pro-life movement over the last 2 generations. The March for Life in Washington started on the first anniversary of the Roe v. Wade decision almost 50 years ago. Every January since, usually in very cold and wintry conditions, tens of thousands of people and hundreds of pro-life groups unite together under the banner of the March for Life. It's really inspirational for all of us to think of how people never gave up, how determined they were, and how they never stopped seeking to protect the most important human right, the right to life. Let's now go to our panel for their reaction to this incredible decision and to talk about their views on where we should go from here. And I'm delighted to be joined in studio by our panel today, and also from the United States. It's great to have Jeanne with us. Jeanne, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Well, first of all, I have to start by thanking you and all of those who are involved with March for Life for the pivotal role that they played in what has happened in this momentous decision of the overturning of Roe versus Wade. I'm sure when the ruling happened, it was probably quite frenetic, so much going on. But now that you have had a little bit of time to digest and to reflect on what has happened, what are your thoughts?
Well, thanks. It was surreal, and there was also just a tremendous amount of peace in my heart and profound gratitude to God on so many levels. That day itself, and since then, my reflections have been filled with gratitude for the marchers over the years. I mean, literally millions of Americans and those abroad have come and marched. And they've marched because abortion is a human rights abuse of today. And they would march past the Supreme Court of the United States every single year. It would literally take like 3 hours or more of people just shoulder to shoulder, hundreds of thousands every year, showing the Supreme Court that Roe was not settled law. And I'm not sure that we would have gotten to this place were it not for those marchers. And so I think I've just been mostly filled with gratitude. So that's the first thing. The second thing is then what's next? Just this incredible experience of, okay, did we think we could overturn Roe in our lifetime? Probably not. And how amazing that we've gotten to this point. And yet the real goal here is to make abortion unthinkable. And we really have our work cut out to do that in the United States. And so thinking really strategically and prayerfully about what are the next steps to build a culture of life in the United States.
And I'm looking forward to talking a little bit more about that in detail later on in our discussion. But William, I wanted to go to you. As Jeanne said there, really many thought this would not happen in their lifetime. Were you surprised when the ruling happened?
Well, I have to say I wasn't surprised on the day because we all knew that it was coming. But I would put it this way. 45 years ago, this looked like a very tough challenge to get this case overturned. And as the years went by, with the reaffirmation of this case a number of times, certainly the challenge seemed to get larger and larger rather than nearer and nearer. So in that respect, I would have to say I absolutely admire the Americans who have kept the faith on this issue, managed to maintain and endure over a period of virtually half a century the struggle to protect the rights of the unborn child. It's a fantastic example for the world. So was I surprised? utterly relieved, overjoyed, I would have to say as well. And the little part of me, the timid part of me was surprised, but it's such a wonderful surprise.
What did you make? I'm sure you read the whole ruling with interest, especially with your legal background, William. Just the dissenting opinions of the three justices. What did you think of that?
Well, I mean, the dissenting opinions they're emotive, as very often dissenting opinions, not just in the American Supreme Court, but in other courts are as well. So there's nothing particularly surprising about that. Put it this way, I wasn't, as it were, intimidated or alarmed by the argument that was made there. There was a high degree of rhetoric, as I say, in the argument. Essentially, the point that was being put was that the concepts that were in the Roe and Wade decision were such that it was impossible to overturn Roe and Wade without, as it were, knocking down the entire edifice of American constitutional law. Now, that is not true. I think that I would disagree with the minority in that respect. It's perfectly possible to overturn Roe and Wade, which held that there is a right to take the life of an innocent human being. That's a horrendous principle to include in one's constitution as a constitutional right. So the overturning of Roe and Wade is entirely consistent with the maintenance of robust libertarian principles in the United States Constitution. That would be the view that I would have. It's interesting, we may have an opportunity to talk about the majority judgments and Judge Alito's judgment in particular. But it is quite possible, as I say, to knock down Roe and Wade and still retain the core elements of sound American constitutional law.
I want to turn to Eilís now. What do you think that the overturning of Roe versus Wade means for Ireland?
Well, it's really welcome, of course, and again, want to pay tribute to Jeanne and everyone who's been working in the United States to help bring this day about. I think it's certainly going to have a very positive impact on the movement here. It sends a message that the abortion law here is not written in stone. Obviously, we've had our very tough few years since the abortion referendum, and I think this is very encouraging for people. I think some of the narrative, as Jeanne mentioned, around it, some of the information that's going out about it has been very faulty, giving people the wrong impression about it. And I think it's really important that we would try and get more information to people about what it actually means. But it reminds people that, you know, things can change. And I think we have a very strong and committed pro-life movement here in Ireland. And I think if we work hard, we can hopefully see the same change here in due course. So I think it will certainly have a very positive impact. America is a very powerful country. It's culturally makes a big, you know, whatever happens there has a big impact around the world. So it'll have impact outside of Ireland too, around the world. So it's very welcome. And
it's, I suppose, a testament to just the many years of commitment and persistence from the pro-life movement. But one of the things that might be, well, it's frustrating whatever country you're in when it comes to the discussion on abortion is how the debate takes shape. But Jeanne, now that once again there's been a little bit of time that has passed, how is the debate taking place both from a political perspective but also at federal and state level?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say that there's been a lot of false rhetoric and just erroneous messaging that's been occurring. So pro-life, you know, strategists at this stage in the game are really trying to work to correct some of that false messaging. So some of the most major false messaging is that states that have enacted, they've been called quote unquote trigger bans. So really states that are extremely protective of life, you know, the North Dakotas and the Texases of the country. There's been this false rhetoric that they wouldn't provide services for women who have an ectopic pregnancy or who have a miscarriage or what have you. And it's like, you know, it reminds me just of some moments in the past where it's, you know, facts don't matter and the truth doesn't seem to matter. The media is just reporting anything that's sensational. So unfortunately, it does a lot of damage and we're trying to do some damage control. But every single state that has enacted a quote unquote trigger ban has an exception in the case of the life of a mother. And in an ectopic pregnancy, I mean, that's not even considered an abortion. So anyway, so there's a lot of erroneous messaging. And we're doing our part to manage some of that as much as possible. But federally, even this week here in our nation's capital, and after we hang up, it's early afternoon here in Washington, D.C., and I'm heading right down to the Hill after we hang up here. But there are 4 hearings on this week, and they're all against us, and so we're fighting an uphill battle, which is not surprising in terms of the media and in terms of pro-abortion politicians. But listen, that's how it's been, for many years. And so we stick to the truth. We try to be as strategic as possible. And we do know that Americans are with us primarily on this issue. So we tap into that and into the common sense on some of these things.
It's interesting, William, isn't it, just to hear Jeanne talk about the discourse, both politically, culturally, obviously. Do you think there's going to be an impact because of this ruling in Ireland and internationally?
I think there already has been an impact in the sense that this decision has reverberated around the world. And if you look at those who disagree with you, who are in favour of taking the life of unborn children, they're disturbed by this case. They see it precisely for what it is. It's a shining light which actually says constitutions, properly interpreted, should not involve the taking of unborn life. And I was interested to hear discussions about ectopic pregnancy. I remember when the Eighth Amendment was being introduced, the opponents of the Eighth Amendment, that was one of the arguments they put forward.
Were very involved in at the time.
Well, I was very much in favour of it, very much in favour of it. And certainly those who opposed it, one of the arguments they put was that the Eighth Amendment would have the effect of rendering unlawful the removal of ectopic pregnancies. We said correctly at the time, absolutely not, and over the years that proposition was of course vindicated. But it's interesting to see similar arguments now being put in the United States against the idea of protection of unborn life.
Isn't that very telling though, in that those falsehoods were being peddled out there, the same playbook is being used, 30, 40 years later. Yet on the pro-life side, we have learned so much in those intervening years in terms of the development of the baby, the negative impact abortion has on women in many circumstances. We have this immense amount of knowledge on our side, but the issue is how do we actually get that out there into the ether when, as Jeanne has touched on, it's very difficult to do when you have so many, politicians against you, media, etc. How do you cut through the noise, Eilís?
Well, it was interesting just to hear, because I've been watching on social media organisations like March for Life USA and others putting out social media content to try and deal with some of that misinformation. So I think, social media is a big element of it because it has given us this avenue and has a big impact with generating support and interest among young people. I think that we have to continue to learn to develop those strategies. But as you say, the media is a lot of elements of the media are a very big problem here, and have really contributed to the misinformation, and then has led to kind of nearly a near hysteria around the decision, which is absolutely not justified, instead of a celebration of what a momentous thing it was. And I think that's regrettable, but I think, to look at the positive, it's been a shot in the arm for the pro-life movement in this country and in many other countries. It's been a huge boost, and I think that's something very welcome, that we can, take notice of what happened in the States, even after so many years, after nearly 60 million abortions, that this law has changed, and now states have a chance to protect the unborn. It's a huge step forward. So I think we just need to continue to work hard and be really resolute and committed to getting the information out in whatever way we can. And we have a lot of smart people now in this movement who can do that if we continue to kind of work together to find the best ways. I think we can make that change.
And it's great that there is something that we can have a cause for inspiration, and as you say, in Ireland and all over the world. I wanted to go back to you, Jeanne, just a little bit about what happens next, okay? Because it feels like the work is only just beginning in terms of some of the things we touched on, actually communicating what this ruling meant, but also, just trying to get the pro-life message out there in general. And then probably one of the most important pieces is the practical supports for women who are in an unplanned pregnancy situation, because, we are trying to be the light for them where these clinics thankfully are closing down. What are your plans? What is the road ahead for March for Life and for pro-life people in general?
Well, I couldn't agree more that it's like, let's look to the next phase. And something that we've been talking about a lot, perhaps you've read it, is there's this wonderful Winston Churchill quote from not quite the end of World War II, the Battle of El Alamein. And he was asked if it was the end. And he said, it's not the end. It's not even the beginning of the end, but perhaps it's the end of the beginning. And that's how we've been looking at this overturn of Roe, momentous, and perhaps the end of the beginning. And so we move into the next stage. And so for the March for Life specifically, you know, our mission, the thing that we bring to the table, quote unquote, in terms of building a culture of life, is to unite, equip, and mobilize people in the public square to show the truth about the human person and the unborn person specifically. And so we started 6 years ago a state march initiative. This year in the United States, we're in 5 states. We've done 3 already. We'll have 2 in the fall. Next year, we want to double that. And our aggressive goal is to be in all 50 states over the course of the next 5 to 6 years. And I think we'll do that because the states are going to be so much more important. But the federal level is still important. So we will continue to fight that battle with love, with our great tools of love and truth at the federal level. And this year being the 50th anniversary of Roe, the first post-Roe March for Life, unbelievable. But we will be marching January 20th, 2023 in our nation's capital again. So that's how we at the March for Life will continue to do this. Now, as always, and as you mentioned, Wendy, we draw an emphasis to the work that's being done to support the safety net, so to speak. So families that are facing unexpected pregnancies. And so there's lots being done there. Even before this has happened, there were well over $270 million in free resources available to these families, whether it's through pregnancy care centers or maternity homes in the US. Just yesterday, one of our senators, Senator Rubio, announced an act that it's a very simple thing, that there will be a website, a portal showing where all the federal and state and private funding streams for these kinds of resources for families facing unexpected pregnancies will be obvious and in a visible one website kind of place where they can get all the information. So we're continuing to welcome these kinds of bills and also just encouraging all of us to give more, to see if we've given as much as we possibly can to maternity homes, et cetera, to do our part to welcome babies into these families.
And it's something that is as true for the United States as it is for Ireland in terms of being part of this culture of life that does the practical as well as the informative for people. This decision has led to people discussing the issue of abortion again and trying to really bowl over some of those falsehoods. Even people being surprised at the sheer devastating numbers of abortions that have taken place in the United States. Sadly, the same is true here in Ireland, just in terms of the huge increase of the number of abortions, something like 70% year on year from when the legislation was introduced. What should be our next steps?
Well, one thing that I've noticed in both America and in Ireland is that in the debate on abortion, and it gives me encouragement and also it's a challenge and a concern, which is that the unborn child, the baby, has disappeared in terms of those who disagree with us. They never talk about the baby, never. Baby's just not there. It's a woman's right to autonomy. It's a woman's right to her body. And it's as though a magic disappearance of the baby has taken place. Our task is to remind people that this is actually about, and we don't want to use graphic language or anything emotive, but it does involve the taking of the life of a human being. And what to some extent gives me confidence is that those who disagree with us, who are in favour of the taking of the life of an unborn human being, can't talk about the human being in question. They just simply can't talk about it. It's a question of a woman's right to autonomy, woman's right to choice, woman's right to her bodily integrity. There's no baby. And I think that indicates a lack of confidence by those who are advocating this position in the, if you like, I don't want to use the word truthfulness, but the moral force of their position. They can't talk about it in the full terms, just to confront the reality. And the disappointing part and the frustrating part is they're never brought to task on that matter. Never. In the media discussions of this matter, nobody ever says, what about the baby? Nobody says, how do you feel about the status of the unborn baby or child? Are you in favour of taking the lives of children generally? The answer is clearly not. Are you in favour of taking the lives of children after birth? Clearly not. So why is it that it's okay to take the life of a child before birth? And at what stage in the pregnancy do you think it's okay, and why? These are basic questions, not talked about at all. And this debate is taking place without the issue being addressed. It's a strange one, but it's the frustrating and challenging and irritating aspect of this is the media never actually call the other side to task. And just from the point of view of moral and philosophical inquiry, what is your position on this matter?
Asking the right questions.
I think you're absolutely right, and we don't talk about the baby enough, in fact, because every abortion that happens is an unborn baby's life ended, and very, very often a mother who suffers and a woman who suffers after abortion. I think as a community, we have to look at the whole picture, so we absolutely have to focus on supporting women in unplanned pregnancy. That's really, really important. We mentioned the abortion figures in the United States, massive abortion figures. We also have very significant abortion figures here. Nearly 20,000 abortions have happened in Ireland since the law changed, with nearly 21,000 when you include women who travelled to England. And that's really down to a number of things. Not enough support, government support, community support, but a lot of the problem is really that the fact that we don't have we have a tax-funded government My Options counselling helpline, which is really only sending women in one direction. And that's not acceptable, because as a community we have to really help women overcome. Nobody wants to have an abortion. Very few women want to have an abortion, and even the pro-choice Guttmacher Institute acknowledges that. Women choose abortion, or so-called choose, because they feel under pressure, because of their education, their family is not supportive, their partner is not supportive, their career challenges. So we need to find kind of a whole solution to all of that and find positive answers so that women don't feel that this is the route that they have to go. But I think that the abortion figures, there's a lot that needs to be done here in Ireland. The 3-year review of the abortion law, which is mandated by our legislation, absolutely has to take a more honest look at what's happened so far. I think just looking back to America, to bring it all back to the discussion about Roe versus Wade, that's been a huge boost for us here and all around the world. And I think the important message that we should take from that is we absolutely cannot throw in the towel. We have to keep working hard to find these solutions and then together make the change that needs to be made.
Yeah, as you say, making sure that we address the root causes that make women feel they have no other choice other than abortion because they're not given the support that's needed. I know that's a lot of what we've talked about. I just want to give the final word to Jeanne today. Just what would you say to people that are watching here specifically in Ireland? It's interesting because earlier on William used the phrase shining light, and before we had abortion introduced here in Ireland, you would have said that about our country. Now we're looking to you to be that shining light. So what are the key things you think that we should be focusing on in this new season for the pro-life movement?
Well, I would say to every one of your viewers that they have a critical role in building a culture of life. I think sometimes we think that it doesn't make a difference, if I do this, that, or the other thing, but it does. And I would further say that each of us has a unique and unrepeatable role. What that is, I don't know, only you would know deep in your heart. Maybe it's to pray in front of an abortion center, or maybe it is to run for office, or maybe, who knows? There's so many different things that it could be. But I can't answer that for you. What I can answer is that each of you has a call here. And so I think maybe one thing that we can all do is just take a little bit of quiet time and look into our hearts and see what's there, because it really is only when we all respond to that collectively that we will build a culture of life. And to have tremendous hope. I think sometimes it feels like we're not making any ground, and especially with all that's happened in Ireland over the course of the last 5 years, I think there can be a sense of discouragement, but I still look to Ireland as a shining city on a hill, so to speak. And I think, listen, have courage and know that what you're doing is making a huge difference. It might be making a difference in one person's life today, but it could also be making a huge difference culturally. So please lean into that and do what you can. Be who you are, and you'll set the world on fire.
It's lovely to finish on a positive note. My thanks to Jeanne, William and Eilís for joining us today. And thank you for giving of your time. And I hope that you feel inspired. I hope you have energy now. So have a think about what Jeanne said. Where can you put your time, talents and gifts? Maybe go on to the Pro-Life Campaign's website and see what you can get involved with today. It's prolifecampaign.ie.